Okay, good evening, everybody. Um, Tonight, I think we can end, an hour early or so, um, about probably even 8:20, maybe 8:30-ish, if we don't take a break. But let's see how it's going when we get to 8 o'clock. And if we're down to one or two slides, then if no one objects, we can do that and end earlier, give you more time from. Well, some of you will still be putting your papers together. So that's the first thing. I always start with announcements and updates, of course. And the first one is that, as you all should know by now, midnight tonight is the deadline for turning your second paper in if you don't want it to be counted late or have any points off. And that would be pretty straightforward as to if you need more time, you have the option, you have that option. But it'd be 5 points off if it's turned in up till 6 days after the deadline, and after that, it's 10 points off. But hopefully, most of you, actually, about a half or over half the class, I think, yeah, about a dozen people have turned them in, so that's a good sign. If you haven't, I'm going to now do this. Yeah, questions? Any questions? Um, Hang on, let me just get to the speaker view because I have something to hold up to show you. Actually, a couple things. But first, there shouldn't be too many questions about the deadline and what I just said. It's pretty straightforward. And I've done this every week or every lecture for at least the last 2 weeks, but I'll do it again in case somebody missed one of those others. This is the way to label your submissions as PDFs. And obviously, this is, I crossed out 1.2. Art 2.1, same procedure for all my classes. Short paper number 2, underline, last name, comma, first name. Remember, though, that if you enrolled or use commonly with friends and family a different name or a different way of, like even a nickname or with or without a middle name or whatever, a hyphenated last name, just the rule is, please, if possible, remember how you enrolled, because that's how I'll know if, when your papers arrive, to log them in correctly in which class you're in, and then begin the grading process. Because if you use a different name or someone else's email handle, that's going to cause confusion. I've said that many times, but I just want to repeat it one more time for this, of course, last of the two papers. So if you have already done that, great. If you haven't, try to make sure you get in by midnight or before midnight tonight, and it'll be on time as a PDF to Mark W at AOL. Now, if you want to send it to Outlook, you could do both, or I obviously it is the official campus um, website, cumbersome and inefficient as it may be. Nonetheless, you of course have that. You do have that option, and it will be counted. Of course, I will check that as well tomorrow morning when I first check all my emails, or sometime in the middle of the day tomorrow. But if you want a more quick response, to get you the paper back graded to you sooner, A, and B, logged into my roll book for the points that you got, or if you need confirmation that I got anything like that, it is faster. It just is to navigate AOL, even if that sounds strange to some of you, because I don't know many people below the age of 30 have AOL. I realize that. Uh, but all I can tell you is anyone who's done both systems, would confirm that Outlook is cumbersome and very time consuming in the way you can't delete things, all in one group. You have to do one at a time. So anyway, I don't want to waste time with details like that. I just want to make sure you all know the deadline for on-time papers is midnight tonight, and I just showed you the format. Does anybody have any questions about the papers? And the requirements. Okay, you remember the requirements are the same, and the credit will be up to 100 points if you get a perfect score. All right, extra credit. I've mentioned several options. I won't repeat them because I've already covered those. So I will send an email reminding you of those options sometime before the final. Extra credit I allow even at up till the end of final exams, because it's easier to enter those points. If anyone wants to know how many points they have total for the entire semester at this point, I've said this again many times, you should just email me and ask me to give you your total points, and that'll tell you what letter grade you've earned thus far and how many points more you need to get the grade you want. Okay, well, what I'm doing now is taking a quick look to see if I can confirm. Yeah, here we go with tonight's roster. That I don't think, as far as extra credit goes, I don't have anyone that's gotten in this class more than 10 points, unless some of you have said something in the last 24 hours or so that I haven't seen. So you have plenty of options up till 60, up to, I mean, the total of 60 points extra credit. I think everybody knows that right by now. And so hopefully some of you who haven't done that and yet aren't sure about what, how you're doing, or if you didn't quite do as well as you hoped you would on either your first paper or your midterm, you should take advantage of those options. Time is running short now, right? Oh, let's see. Yes, I have. And let me get, okay, sir, looking, let's see. I'm not going to read it out here, but if I have it logged in. Yes, and according to my records, this happened with my afternoon class. I logged someone's, graded someone's midterm, logged it in, put it in the roll book, sent them an email to confirm that grade, and assumed that person got the email, and they didn't. It happens. So send me another email. All I can say is you don't need to worry about how you did on the midterm. I'll just tell you that. But it's not appropriate to get more specific than that in a public. So yes, send me an email, and I should be able to do that before I sign off tonight. If you send it to me, before 9, well, 9, let's say 9. Yeah, because at some point I need to, get away from the computer screen. Okay, so yeah, you're in good shape. I'll just say it that way, but I definitely will give you the exact point total, and of course what that letter grade is as soon as I see an email from you. That's true for anybody. I'm glad that came up, because in the afternoon class, it was 2 people, I think, that happened to. So if you haven't received any grades from something you turned in, and of course you have the proof of that with the email record, right? That was turned in on time, or if it was turned late, but a while ago, and you haven't gotten a grade back, email me. Right. I will be proactive in one regard. Before the actual final, I will send probably an email. I guess that's the best way to do it, instead of verbally over Zoom, to those people that I haven't gotten all the assignments from, like both papers and the midterm. And if anything in that, group of assignments is missing, I will give those people a heads up once. I would rather do it as an individual email, obviously, than not say that in public again, Zoom setting or context. So, but on the other hand, you guys can contact me just like Sarah is going to do, or anyone else. Okay. Anybody have any questions right now relating to what I've just mentioned? Okay. Because obviously you don't want to wait till right before finals. If you didn't get a grade from one of the assignments that you're sure you turned in, you have the evidence of it, of course, that means something went astray, either from at your end on the receiving end, which can happen, though it's less likely that it might have happened, more likely that it would have been at my end. For some reason, I mean, nothing's perfect in the internet or computer services functions. Zoom is close, pretty close. Knock on wood, we don't have a big storm come in on the night of the final. That wouldn't be good. That's never happened in only, 3 semesters now. It's my 4th semester of teaching remote classes. So hopefully we'll be in good shape. Doesn't look like major storms are coming anyway for rain-wise for the next few weeks, even though we need the rain, obviously. Okay, now, extra credit. Anybody have any questions about extra credit? Films are such a good source to do that with, that I think, or documentaries. There's so many different choices. It just has to be 1 hour or more, either a feature film about the life and work of an artist, or a documentary about an artist. And then you'd write about, I want to keep it focus on a single artist, because that's more practical and reasonable for you to then make mental notes or whatever from that viewing you do about an artist, and then write 2 pages of what you learned about them. Okay. All right. I can double check. You have obviously, I assume you have the email trail that will verify that. Yeah, no, I definitely got it. and entered the grade. And I know I sent, see, this is strange. I sent them the grades to be, at least that's what my notes say, but that, could have gone astray. So you're also in a position not to worry about your grade, but you want to know obviously the exact points and everything. So I will do that as soon as I get a moment, either tonight or tomorrow. Certainly tomorrow before 5, probably sooner. Since it's what, 2 people so far. If that's all there is, I should be able to get back to both of those people tonight by, let's say, before 9:30. Okay, anybody else have questions about extra credit or grades? Yeah, the easiest extra credit option is to download one of my 2 novels. And one of your, I think it was in this class, fellow students wrote a very nice, I mean, it could be any kind of review. You don't have to write a review to get the points, but if you do, you get an extra 10. If you post it on Amazon, and obviously I would know who posted it, but you can just download either the South Side Stories, which is the one that one of your fellow students reviewed just recently, chose to write a review and post it. So that gave her 25 points. But just to prove you downloaded it, not just that you looked on the free look inside, you guys know how it works, right? Amazon Kindle. Anybody can just read the first 2 chapters or so of any book, novel, or nonfiction. And that doesn't prove that you downloaded it, of course. So that's the only requirement is show me a screenshot of the last chapter or an order number. And of course, they'll have your name, and that's worth 15 points. The other one is the more architecture oriented, the Open House Murders. And that one is kind of fun to read, I've been told. Whatever. You don't have to read the whole thing or even part of it for me to know that you downloaded either one. And then, of course, you have the architecture option, which I don't think anybody's done in this class, maybe one person, where you go to a historic site and look around. In last class, didn't I? Yeah, I did, didn't I? I know I did. I held up my book on Julia Morgan, though it's not part of the assignment for this class. That's 19th and 20th century, well, actually 20th century architecture. That's for 1.2 or 2.2, but or 2.3. But at this point, it's easy to go by her houses. She did 4 homes in Petaluma, and they're all within about a mile of each other, and they're all easily viewable from the sidewalk. And you just get 1 photo of each. So if anybody wants to do that option, you can either, well, the easiest thing is to email me if you don't already have a way. You can just go online. The Petaluma Historical Society, I think it's called. Pretty sure it should be easy to Google. Would have the addresses of those houses. 4 exteriors, 1 of each, is the way to get 10 points. Or if you can go into some other building like a church, right, a synagogue, a mosque, a public building. Here you go. You can welcome. You can get 10 points by just showing me 4 photos of that one site, that one building, or by going inside and showing me 3 photos that you took inside and 1 of the exterior, and then just tell me the name of the building, and the location, your name and your class, and you get 10 points. It had to be PDF and in color, of course, for me to open them and see the pictures. That's an easy option. Well, it depends. If you live way up in the north like Ukiah, it might not be so easy. But Petaluma has several, and Santa Rosa has. I mentioned this already, didn't I? Yeah, I did. So we'll move on here unless there's more questions. It has the chapel that chimes on Santa Rosa Avenue, which is open to the public, and that's easy to go through. There's all kinds of stained glass windows and carved decorations inside. And that's also by Julia Morgan, America's first independent woman architect. And that's right there in Santa Rosa, so it's not too far for many of you to go. But you can choose any site that's of interest and architecturally, not a Costco warehouse, right, or a fast food outlet, but something with a little architectural detail to it. Okay, last time, any other questions for anybody at this point? Now stick around afterwards. Let's see how we do with the timing when we get to around 8 or 8:05. If we're nearly finished, we can just go all the way through since we just had a couple people join us. All right, so let's move this, get this out of the way. And then enlarge this to full view. Here we go. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and give you the notes on the meaning of this. And then when I get to the formal analysis, I'll show you the view that might be on the final. The reason that this is a complex structure And it definitely has, you know what? I forgot something. I'm going to do this now. If I don't do this, hopefully it won't give me trouble. And if it does, I'll just have to reload that set of images. I almost forgot. This is for your benefit, everyone's benefit. I have this handout, sorry, hand drawn artwork. I'm not pretending to be much of an artist, but at least this is adequate. I've been told by many other previous students in previous classes that took this Zoom class, this same subject for me. These are the three main elements, and it's on your list of terms. So this can come up on the true false section. Remember where the definitions might appear in the form of a true false, statement about that item or that term. And if it's any part of it's false, the whole thing's false. So I might say Romanesque architecture includes the following features: short stubby columns, concentric rounded arches, and it might say, columns or a portico. Whoops, that'd be false. The third feature is groin vaulting. Can't draw that. It's too complicated. I'll have to show it to you. You'll see a couple examples by tonight's slides. Okay, so I'm holding this up so you can just see it. And of course, it'll be on the YouTube posted video when we get that done by, let's just say by Saturday afternoon, because lately I've been getting so slammed Friday evening that I don't always get them on by 8 p.m. on Friday. So check after, lunchtime on Saturday and you'll see the video of this and every other class for the rest of the semester. Okay, so there we go. I just wanted you to see that. Now let's see how it works with this screen share. Haven't done this. I usually remember to do that. I think it's not going to require me to go back. Can everybody see this? I need someone to confirm. Can you guys see this? Yes? I haven't heard anybody confirm. I don't want to launch into a lecture.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all. I just, for your sake. So, because sometimes I go right on into the first slide and 2 or 3 minutes later, someone says, none of us can see it. Okay, good. All right, here we go. First must-know slide for tonight. And this one's important enough, I can tell you, like I've been doing all semester, right up front. It will not be cut from the study list, okay? It's the third one down for tonight. Toulouse Cathedral. I know it sounds like 2 words. It's not about whether it's tight or loose. It's the name of a city in France, as some of you know. So 2 words. Toulouse is Toulouse, Toulouse Cathedral. I think everybody knows how to spell cathedral, right? With an R-A-L. Toulouse Cathedral, location France, and the date is 1080. Well, this is a classic example of Romanesque style architecture. And I just held up that, my dad used to call Mickey Mouse artwork. He was a professional artist. He made a living and supported a family of 6 people off of freelance artwork. So he was pretty good at what he did. I can't claim I got those genes, but that drawing should be somewhat helpful. And it's also covered in, of course, the text of Stockstad's chapter on Romanesque art. Okay, so we're focusing on the 3 main features. Now, that's my own rule. I've taught this subject to UC Berkeley Extension, San Francisco State, Sonoma State, and about 10 community colleges. And it just occurred to me after several years at different colleges that having a uniform way of identifying a style of architecture for a class where the students needed to know what style of building was as part of the notes and the meaning. Having a simple, easy to remember system is why I call it the 3-part rule. It's not something you're likely to see in any textbook, unless I write one, which at the moment I'm too busy to do. So what is the 3-part rule? Or I just held it up. Or let's rephrase that. Where are those 3 features that identify this as a Romanesque style cathedral? Well, we'll start with the fact that it has, right, is one of those features, right?
Are the 3 that you show us?
Pardon?
The 3 that you show us with other.
I'm going to show you as we go. Yeah, but I have a better view of it for the details. But right now, I just want to define well, I already said what an apse is, right? So this would have several types of projecting, right? Semicircular, but the definition of Romanesque is, it's what I showed you just a few minutes ago that I held up to the screen, but I'll say it again And it's printed out for you there. 3 main features of Romanesque churches. So let's look at those as we go through. I have several slides of this, including one that's much better. I didn't used to have, and I found it recently online. It's a closer view of this. But this shows you the setting of it. So I will probably come back to it. But why don't we go ahead and go to the best view, which is this one. Okay, if it's on the exam, I would probably use this view. Okay, and when we do the review, I'll confirm. Review for the final. Okay, so concentric rounded arches. Well, that's exactly what is visible on all the windows. You see there's an arch, right? That's the window frame. And then above it is a concentric arch, or one arch within another, right? Or one above another, if you want to word it that way. But the right phrase, I'm giving you the architectural terms, the correct terms, is concentric rounded arches. You notice that they are similar in the way they are rounded, the shape. I mean, it's similar to Roman arches, but the Romans didn't ever do that. They just did a single arch, right, at the top of the Colosseum or the Pont du Gard, you know, their various aqueducts and things. So here, for these churches, the style, Romanesque style churches, use these concentric rounded arches. You can really see them quite well. Well, let's go back to the close-up view. And it's even true on every arch all the way up the tower. Let's see if I've got, yeah, there we go. Now, here they added points to the top level, but you see that most of the Romanesque arches, most of the arches on this church, whether it's the windows, the main windows, or the apses. Remember what an apse is? That's not specific to Romanesque, but the style did use those. An apse, remember, semicircular extension along the wall of a church. That came up earlier with Greek Orthodox architecture, but here they are using it hundreds of years later. So apses are often found, and in fact, almost always on most Romanesque churches. So the windows in the apses, the tower, and the main walls, right, are all Romanesque style arches, which means concentric rounded arches. Why did they do that? Well, it's part of the meaning. Because it's a stronger system, that method of using arches makes a stronger system of support for these massive towers. I mean, let's go back and you'll see, look at this view. This is not the sharpest photo, but it's actually kind of an old one, and I wouldn't use it on the exam, but it's helpful because look at what you're seeing here. This tower is 300 feet tall. That is not even possible. Romans couldn't have built a tower that tall. None of the ancient cultures could have. They didn't have this system of supports with the combination of the apses and the concentric rounded arches, right? And then they also had these short, stubby columns. That's the second feature. So here those are, if you look closely, let's get up close now. You see these columns? And these here, these qualify. They're nowhere near as tall, of course. Yes, go ahead, Jessica.
I do have a question. Like, which of there's any building on the Bay Area that has like similar height?
Yes. I didn't want to confuse you guys, but Romanesque Revival is you know where? Stanford campus. The whole Stanford the old part of it, of course, not the newer build, but any of the buildings built there before about 1910. If you walk, you see it on the news all the time, or, you know, all the sports coverage. Hey, Berkeley, hey. I'm sorry, I don't care. I didn't know a single football game when I was at Cal, but hey, we beat them in a big game. Anyway, yeah, right, Stanford and Cal, rivalry goes back over 120 years with their football teams. Anyway, the point is you can see that if you look up, you know what, anyway. Yes, there are. And there's a few, not many buildings in San Francisco have that style because it's a masonry style of construction, which means made out of brick and stone. And you know that's not safe in an earthquake. It's amazing to me that Stanford campus didn't have more damage, but for whatever reason.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, and there are some others. There are churches. There are churches with that style. In the East Bay, in Oakland, there's a couple. And I think Santa Rosa too, but I can't think of where. Yeah, they're revivals of this style. Yes, you can see those. And that could be a good subject for extra credit for 10 points for 4 photos of a building like that, if you find one. Okay, so let us then finish that list. Okay, I did the first 2 elements, but I didn't quite. I was making the point that these columns are nowhere near as tall as a Greek or Roman temple would have had, right? Those columns, we know because we've seen plenty of Greek and Roman temples before the midterm. The columns are like 50 or 60 feet high. These are not more than about 10 feet or so. So they qualify. The little ones and the big ones are relatively, of course, short, stubby, that's my own phrase, columns, relatively wide, compared to the height. So you know them when you see them, and these are clearly, these qualify. And then these here, maybe not as wide, but they're definitely short. And therefore stubby, of course, implies short, not so much how wide something is. So short stubby columns are the second main feature to look for with Romanesque style churches. The third one is inside, and I think I have found, yeah, there we go. Romanesque groin vaulting is when the ceiling has a particular type of, this is the inside of the same church. You're not going to have to know this slide. I'm just showing it to you. That's the third feature, where the ceiling has these rounded arches that help strengthen the roof. And of course, the tower is heavily weighing down from above. Obviously, you saw that in, let's go back to that. There, you get an idea how big that tower is. These are the tallest towers there. That's the view I wanted to show. Up until this time, these were the tallest human or man-made structures on Earth. And that's not quite true. Whoops, I misspoke. Sorry. Towers. I meant towers. Structures, you'd have to say, is, of course, the Great Pyramid in Giza. The other pyramids, though, I don't think were this tall. In fact, I know they weren't. So one of the Great Pyramids was taller than this, but no other structure had been taller than this. The lighthouse at Alexandria was this tall. The lighthouse, a statue of one of the Greek gods, and it was destroyed in an earthquake. So this was, at the time it was built, one of the tallest structures on Earth, and definitely the tallest of these churches in general, I should say. Romanesque towers were, and this one in particular. It's one of the most prominent. Actually, that's not as good a focus as I should use. So let's just again recap. If it's on the exam, I think you can see this slide better, right, than the first one, though I like showing that because it shows you where the church is in the middle of a big, urban center. Toulouse is like 300,000 people or something. So here we have the short stubby columns, the concentric arches, and then, like I just showed you, have to look inside to see the Romanesque groin vault, meaning rounded, arched, support system on the ceiling. When you put all three of those things together, the grouping of these stubby columns, the double arches, is what some people call them, but that's not the right word. So on the exam, you'd want to use the correct term. Concentric rounded arches with that groin vaulting, that curved, rounded, arched effect on the ceiling inside to reinforce the support. Then you can build churches with 300 or foot tall towers. That's an important part of the meaning of what Romanesque. It was the first style to be able to have towers this tall. So let's go back to that first view. And you can see from here, this is the back end of the church, how it dominates. It was meant to dominate the whole city. Well, let's see now. What can anybody, there's no right or wrong here, but what might it seem like is that there are two main reasons. Let me phrase the question this way. There's two main reasons why the bishop, yes, bishops were the ones who commissioned these churches, and they presided over them. And so let's give you the definition, your first definition for tonight, other than the three main I already covered. So it's a second definition. You already have, of course, it's all printed out already, the three main features of Romanesque churches. There's no fourth one, just cross that, and stray number just wandered into my document there before I printed it. Okay, cathedral. You see that it's near the bottom of the same page. Cathedral. It's a pretty straightforward definition. This is a cathedral. So what does that mean? Okay, cathedral is the most important and usually largest Catholic church. Back then it was Catholic, right? Catholic church in any given city. Doesn't mean all cities have cathedrals, but in cities where they have one. I'll say it again. The first half of the definition is that a cathedral is the most important and usually the largest Catholic church in a given city, comma, over which a bishop presides. That's the P, right? Not resides, over which a bishop presides. That means it's the bishop who decides what style to use for the building, and you know how much it's going to cost, and hopefully they get the money enough to build their dreams. So the bishops were building these churches with taller and taller towers. So these towers started out with the earliest Romanesque churches, say 100 years or so before this one, nowhere near 300 feet. They probably were, you know, 150, 200 feet, which the Romans had buildings that were almost that tall. Remember, the Colosseum was 160 feet. So that was nothing new. But when you get to the later Romanesque churches, like I just said, and that's, I hope you all had it in your notes for this slide, that this one is one of the tallest Romanesque church towers. It's around 300 feet. That's a new thing. Can anybody guess why, if bishops were competing, and they were with each other in different cities, building different cathedrals, why they might each try to make their towers taller than the neighboring cathedrals? There's two reasons, actually. Or why did they even make these towers this tall to begin with?
I don't know, maybe even closer to God.
Yeah, good. No, yeah, excellent. Yeah, that is one of the reasons.
Also to show
Yes,
like
yes.
their influence or power or something.
Say that again. Sorry.
To show their influence or power.
Well, yes, their power. Okay, excellent. You guys usually it 3 or 4 minutes to get to that point. So the first two people that spoke up, you're both right. Let's say that now, though, for those who are writing this in your notes, as part of the meaning. The reason that Romanesque church towers were so tall, and that different bishops competed to build the taller and taller, just keep saying it that way. I mean, taller and taller towers. There were two reasons. One is the towers themselves were supposed to symbolize getting closer to God. Yes, when you go inside the church, the whole idea supposedly is you'll get closer to God. Of course, if you follow the teachings of that church, right? So yes, it's symbolically meant to, you know, evoke the feeling of getting closer to God, definitely. And then the other reason is about power. And I'm going to go ahead and use a Freudian reference. If anyone ever studied psychology or whatever, Freud's theories of various things, I'll just paraphrase him. You could say that when these bishops were competing with each other, and it was to show off how powerful and important they were, the taller their tower, the more important or powerful that bishop was. I call that a case of tower envy. You call it what you want. I won't use the other phrase. They get me in trouble. The Freudian phrase for men who compare things, I'll just leave it at that. Tower envy is just a shorthand way of saying that. But in your notes, you don't need to write that unless you want to. It was a case of bishops competing to show off their power. My tower's bigger than your tower, in other words, is quite literally. I'm sure that actual sentence was in French, of course, because this was France. Would have been said, probably, if not written at some point, when a bishop built a taller tower than anyone nearby in all the other cities and cathedrals in that region. Yeah, so they were competing with each other to show off their power and their importance. And the taller the tower, the greater the power. There we go. That's you can use that if you want, if it helps you, but you can write it just normally if you prefer. But it's not just a flippant observation. It's a fact that we have records to verify these bishops were really focused on showing off their importance to each other. So it was a competition, not for every bishop, but for many of them. All right, that's pretty much the whole meaning. So let's do the formal analysis with the view here. I think it's a better view, right? And that would be that it is balanced, symmetrical completely left to right, but obviously unbalanced toward the bottom. The rhythm is very evident with these concentric arches everywhere at least up until the top part of the tower, and the short stubby columns, of course. And then the tower itself has, sections, and each section is the same height and same shape. So there's a lot of rhythm. And by the way, these apses create rhythm too, of course. These are projected, right? Semicircular projections, but look what they do. They help support a larger apse, and then all four of these support the tallest apse, and all of those apses together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 together, help support this immensely heavy tower. You can imagine how massively heavy that tower is. Okay, so that is an important point, that the apses are part of the rhythm, but also they're a functional purpose there, of course. All right, the textures are the real smooth texture of glass and real rough texture of brick and stone. Those are the only three textures you can see in this view. It is stable on the apses and the tower and the arched windows, right? But the walls and corners of the building, of the structure itself, the corners and the main walls, we'll say, on either side of the apses, those, of course, are stable. You can make the case that the columns are too, because they're, upright and straight, but of course they're rounded. So I guess the columns are both, obviously, both stable and dynamic, but the windows are definitely dynamic, as is the tower and the apses. So it's got elements of both. For space, it's the real space of a long, narrow aisle. We're going to define what that is. It's called a nave, but that'll be for the next slide, or one of the next slides. So just say inside, the space is divided into one long, narrow aisle with about an 90-foot high ceiling, or it's more like 80. So say about 80-foot high ceiling, and above which is a 300-foot tall tower, or a tower that's about 300 feet tall. It might be 295 or something, but it's about 300 feet. To the tip, of course, the top of where the cross is, as you can see, there's a cross up there. Let's get up close. Let's see, I think you can see it. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so that's the real space. There are a few smaller rooms, but most of the building is this one long aisle, and you'll see the evidence of that when we show a couple more interiors in the next few slides. And then the tower rises up above the rest of the building, of course, to a height of about 300 feet. Okay, colors are warm and cool, both, but more warm than cool because of the red brick and the red clay tile, right, on the walls and the roofs, right? You see that here? So I forgot, that is another real texture. There's no similar textures. I should have mentioned that's the fourth texture. And that is real smooth clay tile. Okay, let's see. And the largest mass is the main walls, or is it the tower? Well, let's go back and see. Let's go back and see the view from here. Well, the largest mass is the central aisle. The right word is nave. Let's use that word now, and I'll define it with another slide where you can see an actual nave interior. So for now, just N-A-V-E, nave, right? That's a word I think you've all seen. But if you weren't sure what it is, that's the main aisle of a church here. So the nave is the largest mass. And then the tower, boy, it's a close call. It's hard to say. If you count the tower as being from the ground up, but it really isn't, it's supported by the roof, then you'd have to say it was first largest mass would be the nave, second largest the tower, and then the main walls on the they're called transepts. I don't expect you to know that word. I didn't put it on the syllabus or the list of terms to know, but it's the arms of the cross. And again, that's why this is a really helpful slide, even though, see, that's the shape of a cross, the shape of the church itself, the floor plan. So those are like the arms of a cross. The right word is transepts with an S-E-P-T, but if you don't want to write it that way, you can just say the wings or side arms of the building, or would be the third largest mass. There's no technique for modeling, of course, just the shadows from the sun. The lines are visual around the arches, especially in this photo where the sun's hitting it. And at the corners, there's not really any visible carved line. If you got up really close, you might see some, but you can't in this photo. So just visual lines are used here. And let's see, balance, texture, modeling, color. I think I've mentioned the rhythm. Yeah, I think, am I forgetting something here? I didn't, space. I think we covered everything. Okay, another view of it from the back. You can see that massive tower dominating the skyline of that entire area. You can see it. I've never been to Toulouse, but I could see the cathedral from the train window as it passed miles outside the city of Toulouse, because I was on an express train to Spain. Sounds like a song, an express train to Spain. And we didn't stop more than 2 or 3 times between Paris and Barcelona. But on the way, Toulouse is somewhere in the region. In that tower, just you can see it from miles and miles away. There are the apses. Here it is at night. Just, you don't have to write anymore. No, you've got plenty. Yeah, nice view of it from the side. Okay, that's not a must-know slide. We are going to go forward now. I know it sounds odd. We already covered these, but this is the way the slide librarian put these together. Okay, I'm going to do the nave slide. And that's this one, the next one. Okay, the next must-know. So you need to take notes on this one. Nave, nave of Saint Etienne. Now, the French usually abbreviate Saint, just like the city St. Louis, as you may know, it's a French city. It was part of the French colonies when it was founded. ST period is the usual way of spelling saint in French. So Nave Saint, or Saint, the French say Saint, ST period, Etienne. And this is spelled Etienne. The location is a city in France, but it's Caen. It's how you say it actually, Caen, Caen, Caen. So you do need to know the city in this case, because there's more than one church in France with this name. That's why we give you the city, not the country. Okay, the date's 1133. This is a Romanesque nave. So now, what is the word nave? It's a pretty simple definition. A nave is the long central aisle in a Christian church. I'll repeat it, of course. The long central aisle in a Christian church, comma, in which worshipers sit facing the altar. There's the altar where, of course, the priest, or maybe the bishop, if the bishop's, conducting the church ceremony. They don't always do that. It might just be a priest. But anyway, the priest or bishop would give the service, right? Of course, back then this was Catholic, but nave, the term nave applies to any Christian church. Just about. Now, there are some that don't have naves, but that's very, very recent modern style churches. So it doesn't only mean Catholic churches. Again, I'll repeat it one more time. The nave is the long central aisle of a Christian church, comma, in which the worshipers sit facing the altar. Okay, so this is a Romanesque style nave. How do we know? Well, let's start with the two things you should already now start to recognize, because this could come up on this one or the other one on the final. These are Romanesque concentric arches. I mean, they literally jump out at you and almost say, I mean, they're so obviously concentric, one arch within another, and those two together make this wall much stronger and capable of supporting much more weight. You see the second level, the upper balcony level, has the same Romanesque style concentric arches, concentric rounded arches. Here we go. Good timing. We're just on the second slide from the syllabus, because this one is the nave, Nave, of Saint Etienne. That's, I already spelled that. I'll spell it one more time. Etienne in the city of Caen, France. We're looking at what makes this a Romanesque style. And so we have the short stubby columns. There they are again. Remember, these columns, it depends on what you're comparing them to. Roman and Greek temples, the columns are 40 or 50 feet tall, some of them 60 feet tall. These aren't more than, at most, about 12 to 14 feet. So they're considered short, maybe 15 feet, but they're not anywhere near the height of a Greek or Roman temple. So short is a relative term. Remember that. So short, relatively stubby. Well, up here, they really are literally short and stubby, and even more so on the upper level. If you look at these aren't even maybe 6 feet tall, possibly 7 or 8. So they're short, stubby columns, and there's a concentric rounded arches. All the arches have that. The third feature we couldn't see very clearly before is the Romanesque, right, groin vaulting. Now, groin means the arches intersect. So one of the slides I showed you, I think it wasn't a must know, so you didn't need to take notes. Hopefully it doesn't confuse the issue. This is an example, a clearer, better shot than any photo I could find for this semester, of the ceiling of a Romanesque nave where the arches are rounded. So you follow the cursor here, but you can all see the cursor, right? These are all rounded arches, even though at first glance you might say, oh, aren't they pointed? No, look carefully. There's one arch, here's another, and here's another. They intersect. When we say groin, we mean intersecting. So these are rounded intersecting arches, which of course, without necessarily having to understand any of the engineering, not necessary to get a good grade in this class to have an engineering concept even. You don't have to think of it that way. You could just say in your notes, these arches, this type of ceiling with these Romanesque groin vaulting or arches that intersect is much stronger than just a flat or rounded ceiling without the vaulting, without the support. Vaulting means support, basically, is another way of saying it. So again, if you add all that together with the concentric rounded arches, the stubby columns, they're usually grouped too. You see that? So that makes them stronger. There's two by two, two beside each other. So the short stubby columns, the Romanesque concentric rounded arches, and then that groin vaulting, the rounded groin vaulting, all three together make it possible to have a tower as tall as, let's go back and see how tall it is. This is that church. Look how there's two of these towers. You could imagine how heavy each one is, and then you put two of them there. Well, something has to support them besides the front wall. That it would have collapsed, these two towers, both of them, a long time ago, if it weren't for that groin vaulting and the Romanesque round arches. I used to make this a must-know slide, but I've taken it off the list just to keep the number of slides down a bit for you this late in the semester. Okay, so this is the outside of that same church, Saint Etienne, and this is why it needed those Romanesque groin vaulting on the ceiling. We are looking at this section of it, right? This whole section is what we were looking at with the groin vaulting spanning across the top of the ceiling. And then these are those tall towers that these reach to about 250 feet, not quite as tall as the ones at Toulouse, but they're pretty tall. And then you've got the rounded, right, concentric arches, but we've seen them on the inside. So I just think this is a nice shot. Although look at these cars, it's probably a 40 or 50-year-old slide. Hard to say. But anyway, the church hasn't changed in all those years, of course, and it's intact. It's over 1,000 years, or very close to 1,000 years old. I guess 900. All right, so that's why I'm showing you this, but there is one other explanation here. If you look at the seating, I think most you can tell those are not medieval seats. These are folding chairs, and no, they did not have folding chairs in the Middle Ages, as you I'm sure all know. So you might wonder, why are those there? Because it's the last part of the meaning now, you can say on this slide. Because in the Middle Ages, most, not all, but most churches did not provide any seating for the vast majority of worshipers. Only the wealthy got their own private wooden pews, or it's almost like a bench, right? But you know the word pew, right? P-E-W, inside churches. Now, obviously, every church, the whole floor plan is covered, floor space is covered with pews. So you can have hundreds of people sit down at one time. Well, here, the church is bought and then brought or put up in place these folding chairs because there was no permanent seating provided. And for centuries, you brought your own seating, whether it was a bale of hay. Yep, believe it or not, some people sat on bales of hay if they were farmers and there were, 2 or 3 strong sons and their father could carry a bale of hay. You might bring it in with you and sit on it, and maybe your whole family could sit on it. I mean, that's unlikely, but it did happen. I'm not saying it's unlikely that they used bales of hay, but of course, most of the time those were not what you might have a pillow, or you might have, you might just sit on the floor, cross-legged. A lot of people did that. So if you're curious, no, there was no permanent seating here. Many churches did. The ones in like big cities like Paris, Notre Dame, for instance, the one that burned about 2 years ago, 3 now almost. Yeah, right. Those are stone and they were original. But most churches in the Middle Ages didn't provide seating for the vast majority of worshipers. That's why you see these temporary folding chairs here. Okay, let's do the formal analysis. It's one long open, right, narrow aisle with a ceiling that is this one's only about 60 feet tall. It's not as tall as many ceilings in other Romanesque churches, but this one's around 60 to 70. So say between 60 and 70 feet tall to the very peak of the ceiling there might be about 70 feet, so between 60 and 70 feet tall. And then we have the spaces, one long aisle, as I just said, with about 60 or 70 foot high ceiling, and then 2 shorter, meaning not as tall, side aisles. You can't see this one, but that's the only way you can get your seat, right? It would be or to the place you want to sit if there's no seat, is you weren't going to walk through whole crowds of people and step on them. You'd go down the side aisle. So that's what this is. So you walk along behind these arches and then come out wherever you're going to sit, whatever space you choose that's open. So there, I'll say it again, the space is divided into one long narrow aisle, i.e. the nave, with a 60 to 70 foot high ceiling and two shorter side aisles. The ceilings aren't quite as tall here. In fact, there's a balcony, so obviously there's solid stone between these two, right, levels. But the nave is open, as always, all the way to the back of the church. Okay, and then we have the rhythm, of course, with the concentric rounded arches, the short stubby columns, and the Romanesque groin vaulting. Remember, the chairs aren't part of it, so it's not part of the rhythm. There's plenty of repeated shapes, and then it's stable on the walls and the floor, but definitely the whole ceiling is dynamic. The arches are dynamic, so it's a mixture of both. And then the modeling is just the shadows created by the sun, of course. For the sunlight. There is visual line here. If you got close enough, you could see carved line, right? But I'm not going to use a close-up for you because I don't want to, interrupt your analysis, writing formal elements and what have you, or meaning, and your answers. If this was on, let's say it will be, but if it were to be on the slide essay, and you did a formal analysis, I want the view to be a single view that everyone can see exactly the same view at the same time, like we did on the midterm. So I won't get a close-up view of this for you to see, but I think you can tell that there's visual in this photo. Most of what you see is not visible carved line, but rather mostly visual. Remember, that's with an S, visual line. And of course, that's true of also the groining or groin vaulting on the ceiling. That creates line. The largest mass, it's actually the ceiling. Because of all that groin vaulting, the ceiling is a heavier mass than the floor. The second largest mass would, of course, be the floor. And then the bottom row of arches, right? The stonework above them. And then the middle row. You only have to name the 3 or maybe 4 largest masses, remember? And then we have for color, it's cool. All the colors are cool. The floor tiles are alternating blue and off-white. The ceiling has a blue tinted brick, actually, is what that is. Or no, that's plaster. They plastered it over. That's right, because I have an old slide that showed it was originally it was brick, so they plastered it. And that's a kind of a light blue. It's definitely cool color, and all the rest of it, the entire set of walls, details, I mean, on all the walls, are a cool off-white / light gray. Either way, this all is cool. No warm colors. And then we have, let's see, what am I forgetting? Balance, oh, totally symmetrical, as most of these churches would have been. If you draw a line down the middle of the ceiling, both halves are identical. And to me, it's balanced top to bottom. If that's roughly the middle, about the middle of the height of the walls on either side, they're identical. It's about equal above and below the midline there. And then the textures are the real rough texture of stone and smooth texture of tile on the floor. And I have to admit, this is a new slide. I guess you could call that, to me, stucco is usually rough. I'm looking at on my own wall where we stucco the inside of our house when we bought it. Yeah, I would call it rough. So rough real stone, rough real plaster, and real smooth tile on the floor. There's no cement textures visible here. Okay. I think that's, covered everything. So now that's going too far forward. So we're going to go to, well, I'm going to go back because that's right. This was done by the slide librarian. She did there we go. A wonderful job, but the slides are not in the same order that I originally had on my syllabus. Okay, this is a very important slide. If I had to pick one slide today that has a very high probability, well, 2. The first slide we saw, which was Toulouse Cathedral, this one, and then the very last one we're going to see, are the 3 that I definitely won't cut. The last one is a cathedral at Pisa. Not pizza, Pisa with an S, a town in Italy, of course. We'll get to that. It'll be our last must know. And I'm pretty sure we'll just end early tonight, if that's okay with everybody, because it's only 7:27 and we only have, 4 more slides, but 2 of them won't take that long. This one, though, yes, it's important. We're not going to rush. Okay, this is the next must know. It's near the bottom of the list today. Is Bayou Tapestry. Bayeux, Tapestry. 2 words. Bayeux is a town in France. The location, therefore, is the country, France. And the date is 1082. Okay, so what do we see here? Well, a tapestry, right? Woven by nuns. No, not monks. That's important detail. Nuns wove this tapestry in a monastery, or you could say nunnery to be more accurate. That'd be the right word. In northern France to what? To commemorate, if you prefer celebrate, but that sounds like something that happens right after something. Commemorate is when you look back, right? Everybody is used to those terms, I'm sure. So I would use the word commemorate the victory of William the Conqueror over the English. William the Conqueror. If you don't know who he was, you definitely will need to if this slide appears on the essay part of the final. I will explain, of course. Okay, so it commemorates an event that occurred nearly 20 years earlier. You don't have to write that detail, how many years ago, but it's years after the event, in other words. And it's all part of the meaning. Second fact was that it's part of a 200, there's one section, I should say, that's a better word, one section of a 220-foot long tapestry, now on display in a museum in northern France. I've never gotten to see it. I wish I could. It's just not close to any of the big cities I always stay at. But you can just say it's in a museum now on display in a museum in northern France. And if it wasn't, it would have deteriorated. It's under I'm sure airtight control in the glass case it's displayed in. So it's part of a section of a 220-foot long tapestry. What does this scene depict? It depicts William the Conqueror landing in England. Well, William the Conqueror, there he is. He's got the only green horse. It is darkness. I don't think that's an authentic horse color, but in any case, that distinguishes him, but also he's wearing royal robes. He was the king of Normandy. Normandy, we covered, remember last week, the Vikings. If that's not familiar or you didn't see last week's lecture, you do need to go back and review that section about the Viking ship's head, right, slide. Okay, so what we see here is an image of the king of northern France, descended from Vikings, but by the time he came along, he spoke French, he was French. He was, of course, mixed heritage. By definition, the Vikings invaded, they forced the local population to intermarry. 200 years later, you get this new thing called Normandy, which, by the way, is where D-Day was, the World War II battle. It's in the northern coast of France. So he was the king of Normandy, the kingdom of Normandy, which means he was descended from Vikings. Knows he was a warrior, and he was good at it. So he invaded England because he thought the king of England should give him his throne and his crown. In other words, he should be king of both places. And the king of England, there he is, said no. And that's him, Harold. He was a Saxon. Remember, we talked about the Saxons last week too. So if you hear that, you should be familiar with that term. Those were the Celtic people that ruled England after the fall of the Roman Empire. But they were invaded by the French. They, in essence, were French by this time, right? It's an early, version of what later became the country France, Normandy, the kingdom of Normandy. So there he is, king of the kingdom of Normandy, a conqueror, a very aggressive and warlike but successful invader. He's invading England. That's what this shows. And this is not a small fact. This is the last time in history, we're talking about ever, that there was a successful invasion of the British Isles. The last time. Do you know how many different cultures tried to invade England? I think you know. I mean, most recently, we're looking at Napoleon, right? The Spanish Armada, this is the last few hundred years. A couple of other kingdoms from other parts of and of course, Hitler. None of them succeeded. In fact, some of them didn't even really try. Hitler never did. Well, he did. He bombed the British, during the war. So just keep it simple. All you have to say is this, that this depicts the last successful invasion of England by William the Conqueror, king of Normandy, who then united is a better word, united both kingdoms, England and what was then the forerunner of France, technically called Normandy, into one kingdom. Now, the last part of this, why it's of any relevance, who cares, right? This is 1066. You don't have to know the year of the event it's depicting, but it's Very. It'd be as famous if you were studying his, trying to get even a high school diploma. They don't call it that. In England, I graduate from high school, you'd have to know that date. You'd be tested on it. It's as important to them as 1776 is here. So why is that so important? Because after this invasion, French language, French architecture, and French culture was imported into England. And if you think that that's just a footnote, think again. Any word in English that ends in ETTE or ET or anything that has a French sounding name, which is almost 20%. Here's the way to write it. Nearly 1 out of 5 words in modern English are of French origin, and it's because mostly of this invasion, in which William the Conqueror brings the French language. He forced people to learn French, not the peasants, but the language changed because of his becoming king of then both England and northern France. So modern American English really starts with this invasion. And so all of us speaking to each other and you and your friends and family, anyway, in the English language, are definitely directly a result of this invasion. You couldn't put, more important emphasis on that fact. It literally changed. You just say Western, of course, because this is a Western art history class. The course of Western history and especially of languages. You wouldn't understand a word the Saxon spoke. When you get this guy here, if you heard him speaking, we wouldn't understand him at all or saw it written. Yeah, Saxon Celtic language is not anything like modern. And there was some similarities. Of course, some of the words are the same even. But the modern language we speak today, called English, really starts here with this invasion. And there he is, William the Conqueror with his top general. And there are some of his soldiers in a Viking longboat. You see that? That boat is the same style as the Vikings took across the Atlantic and all the way around the Mediterranean, all over Russia. We talked about that last week. Same style of boat, same kind of warfare. So they won. Well, it all took one battle and they defeated. And the last thing I'll say, this is kind of a sad footnote, but it's part of the meaning. Harold, he got a nickname after this. He didn't believe his own spies. That's who these guys are. They were spies that were up in this tower, and they're saying, he's coming, get ready. The invaders are here. And he didn't believe them. So he's nicknamed Harold the Unready. So not only did he lose that battle and his kingdom, he lost his head and, of course, his crown on it, and he lost all of his worldly belongings. He lost everything in one battle in that 1 year, that invasion. That's all it took for William the Conqueror to defeat Harold. Okay, so that's plenty on the meaning of this. Let's do a formal analysis. Well, the colors to me are interesting because they're not your usual browns and tans, but those, of course, would be warm colors. And then the greens, there's actually quite a bit of green on the clothing, and one horse here, William's horse, are cool. So it's mostly warm browns and tans with some cool green. The background isn't part of the color. That's the fabric itself. The lines are a mixture of bold and thin. Thin on the people's faces, but bold on the horses and these two towers. That's a siege tower, which they're going to roll. It would be on wheels that would roll it up to, I don't know if you've seen Monty Python's Holy Grail, up to the walls of a castle. But they didn't need to because they defeated the English army in the field in one battle. That they thought they'd have to besiege, parts of England. So they're building a wooden tower. And then this is a stone tower that was a lookout. So those, of course, have bold outlines, as does the tent. And that's a tent that Harold the Unready is about to get his big surprise in. But all the details on the human figures are thin outlines. There's no modeling. I don't see any, even on the sail here. But there definitely is simulated texture on that sail, on the clothing, at least of the larger figures, these four. There definitely is some simulated texture on their robes. And on the tent, the ceiling, I guess, or top of the tent. So there's simulated texture. It is nicely balanced, isn't it? The tent is almost the same space as the Viking longboat. And you've got two people here, two Norman invaders, and then two Saxon spies, two and two towers. It's very carefully balanced. I'm not sure if that was deliberate or just the function of the way the photo was framed. But in this image, which is what you'd see if it's on the test, it's very carefully balanced. The largest mass, well, it's almost equal. Like I was saying, I'd say the Viking longboat and the tent are the two largest. And then if you don't count these as a single mass because they overlap, the two men on horse, the two Norman invaders. If you count them, they as one mass, they'd be the second largest. But otherwise, it's probably the two towers. Well, it'd be the siege tower, the wooden tower. That's what this is, and then the stone one. And then after that, I guess it would be William because his figure is larger than the others. Well, oops, I misspoke. That's right. I apologize. For some reason, even though these were French nuns celebrating a French victory over England, the King of England is shown larger for whatever reason. So he would be the third largest mass, and then I guess William. Okay, and then we have only one technique for space, which we've already mentioned, overlapping. The sail overlaps some of the soldiers in their boat, the two invaders overlap their horses, and so forth, right? The clothing overlaps all the figures. Then we have, let's see, the rhythm is obvious with the human figures, the heads, arms, hands, and the horses, their legs. Even the two towers have some similar shapes. So there's a lot of rhythm. Is it stable or dynamic? It's mostly stable. Look carefully. Most of the human figures are standing, or in the case of the two on their horseback, sitting upright. The towers are upright. The frame of this tent is upright. The king of the Saxon king is upright. It's mostly stable, but obviously there are several dynamic details like the front and back of the Viking longboat. You could just say boat if you prefer, and the sail and the top of the tent there. Okay, I don't think, and there's no modeling. I think I said that right. None anywhere. Okay, so let's move on. This is just to show you, it's not a must know. I think this is actually, I didn't take this slide, but I took one just like it with the camera on a brief layover. That's a Romanesque country church, not a cathedral, nowhere near. It's not on the syllabus, but just so you can see, look how many concentric arches they crammed into this space. It's almost like a double Romanesque style concentric archway above the main door, but otherwise they are the traditional Romanesque concentric. And there's your short stubby columns going all the way across the upper half of the facade there. It's in a small town in central France. Okay, we covered that isn't a must know on this syllabus this semester anyway, but this one was. Now we get to, you know what? I kind of want to end with that. It's the most interesting slide. So what I'm going to say is the next two are similar, and so I can tell you now we're going to end around 8:20ish at this point. But of course, if you have questions, that's definitely what we're here for, of course, and what I would obviously promise to stop and answer at any point if you have those. Otherwise, if they're not about the slides, you can ask me at the end. I'll stick around as long as need be to answer any other questions after the last slide. Okay, this is a must know. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this and the other piece of sculpture. So we're not, in other words, we're not only covering Romanesque churches. Might seem that way. Those are, the ones we just almost completed, but we have one more. The cathedral at Pisa will be our last one. Okay, so here we go. This one is Mission. It's the second one down under week 15. Mission, with two S's, of course. Mission of the Apostles from Vézelay. I know that's a long title. Apostles means the followers of Jesus, right? His disciples is the other way to say it. Apostles. Mission of the Apostles from Vézelay is a city in France. And that's Vezelay. Vezelay. So again, the title, Mission of the Apostles from Vézelay, France, and the date is 1150. This is a classic example of Romanesque sculpture, and that's what we're going to now focus mostly on for the meaning. How do you recognize Romanesque sculpture? Well, with Romanesque sculpture, there's only two identifying main or major identifying features. So let's see those now. Okay, first, does anybody notice something unusual about the proportions or shape of, this is Jesus, and these are his disciples. So he's in heaven. He's on a throne. See, in heaven, they call it the throne room of heaven. And that's, an image in a lot of Christian art from especially the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So here he is, Jesus up in heaven, looking down at his followers, his disciples who are still down on earth, alive, of course, They're spreading his word, the Bible. There they are. Never mind, the Bible wasn't created for a good 60 years by later, early Catholics. But in any case, this is just, an imaginary, obviously, completely imaginary scene, not based on any particular event, in which Jesus is inspiring, you see, with his fingertips having divine energy or inspiration coming out of the fingertips down into the brains or heads, if you want to say, of his disciples, while they're carrying Bibles to go spread his teachings, right? So that's the mission of the apostles, that they are supposed to spread the words that Jesus said while he was on earth, right? That's what the meaning of the title is. But there's a lot more to the meaning of it, and that would be the style being Romanesque is a really important part of the meaning. So what do you notice about the legs here, Jesus's legs, the proportions of them? Is that normal? Look at the knee. Whoops, I'm sorry, I forgot to get close. Well, anybody notice? Or how about even the disciples or apostles? Look at that. Well, it's true, they're not standing upright. If they were standing upright, would their legs be a normal proportion to the rest of their body? Or would Jesus's, if he was standing upright? Anybody notice what I'm talking about? There's something odd about the proportions of the human figures in this whole piece of sculpture. It's, of course, bas relief or high relief is a type of bas relief, obviously raised off the flat background. Is that normal for people to have this long a set of, especially the bottom half of the leg? Well, okay, I guess it's laid out. Obviously, there's not a normal proportion to any of the human figures. They have what all Romanesque sculpture did was elongated limbs. That's the right way to say it, to write it, and it's the shortest and clearest. As one of the two features of Romanesque sculpture, this has, all the human figures do, elongated limbs, but that even includes his hands. Look at that hand. His hand is bigger than his head. You see that? The fingers even are too long. So elongated limbs, meaning arms, hands, legs, and feet, are much longer, obviously, than normal human bodies. They are deliberately distorted. That's the other way to write that in Romanesque sculpture. Why, I'm not 100% sure, except I will put the second feature now out, since I guess it's late and people won't want to, speak out about this one. I'll just tell you the second feature, okay, of Romanesque sculpture is a dynamic, composition of the human figures. The human figures are in motion. They're full of energy and life. They're in movement, however you want to write that. They are definitely not static. They're not just sitting bolt or standing bolt upright. They're in movement, as you can see. Jesus almost looks like his legs are swaying in time to some unknown celestial music down on earth, maybe. These guys have Walkmans or whatever. Anyway, so they're dancing. Look at them. I don't know any other place where you'd see this in medieval art. It's only Romanesque sculpture that did that. So I'll repeat that. The two main distinguishing features or characteristics of Romanesque sculpture are an use of elongated limbs, i.e. arms, legs, hands, and feet on all the main figures, and a composition that's full of movement or motion, where the human figures are in motion or dynamic, you can say. Of course, then we're going to do the formal analysis in just a minute. But there is one more thing about, actually two more things about the meaning. Anybody notice anything up here? What's this? Surely some of you could tell what this is. What are these symbols? Should look familiar to some of you. Well, anybody want to just hazard a guess? You got a crab, you got twins, you've got, let's see, fish. Nobody?
The Zodiac sign?
Yes, there we go. Thank you. The signs of the Zodiac. What in heaven's name? I was going to say heck. The nuns would have wrapped my knuckles with a ruler. I'm sorry. My uncle used to go with me to church. Yeah, I was raised Catholic for a few years. The nuns don't like you questioning things. But why are those there? That is not part of Christian symbolism. That's an important one of the final two facts about the meaning. Yes, those are the signs of the Zodiac. Absolutely correct. And they're there because whoever designed it would have been the bishop whoever, just say whoever, we don't know for sure it was bishop. Bishops usually design their own churches, but maybe this one was different. So we'll just say whoever designed the church, the church official, we'll say it that way, who designed this piece of sculpture, maybe not the whole church, maybe just this piece of sculpture. Whoever designed this piece of sculpture would clearly have been working for the Catholic Church. They are acknowledging the fact that many of their own worshipers still believe in the old pagan religions. And the second evidence of that is, look at this. This is bizarre, isn't it? Human bodies with animal heads. These are weird looking creatures. If you look closely here, this one looks almost like he's got some kind of a crab-like claw instead of an arm. So say some of the figures in the second row, the top row is signs of the zodiac, no question, are also pagan symbols of some kind of, earlier gods and goddesses that people believed in before Christianity. Remember the word pagan? I said it will almost certainly be a word you need to use if you want to get 100% credit on the final, because we're going to have some kind of imagery from early Christian periods, either Romanesque or last week's lecture. Pagan, P-A-G-A-N, meaning the Christian use of the term back in the old days. Hardly anybody says it anymore, but it was anything non-Christian. So these are pagan symbols, the signs of the zodiac and the mythological creatures or strange half human, half animal creatures in the second circle there. And then we have one more thing. Jesus's, let's do it, left hand is missing, right? And so are the heads of the three saints on the left. So I'm going to give you one more clue here. This is the last fact about the meaning of this slide. Can anybody think of an event that occurred in France a little over 200 years ago that might have had something to do with the this was vandalism. This was organized vandalism, like what's happening in San Francisco and Union Square. That's not vandalism, that's theft. Makes you know, sure you want to go to Union Square to see the Christmas tree. If you haven't been following the news, yeah, well, take a look. Anyway, what we're looking at here, though, isn't anything about, any kind of statement. It's an act of vandalism. It's probably more spontaneous, actually. But what happened in France over 200 years ago, which led to mob riots running through all the cities and doing all kinds of various things? Anybody? I think you all know, but anybody want to? What was that event called? It happened in the late 1700s, and it definitely changed the history of France and the rest of Europe. World history. I know some of you know what it is. I guess you're just too tired. So one more time. What major event occurred in France that completely overthrew all the previous systems in the late 1700s? I guess I'm being perverse. I'm going to wait. Somebody out there has to know. One event that changed the course of history, not just in France, but then because of what happened there, it affected the whole rest of Europe. And it led to violence, death, and eventually Napoleon, who took over after all the chaos. Nobody? Well, I'm surprised. The French Revolution is why this structure, it's bas-relief. It's a panel is the right word for that. Bas-relief panel. Why it's damaged? Because during the French Revolution, as I don't know, I thought that was part of world history. I'm not sure anymore, but I know that that's what my daughter learned. There were mobs who would rampage through cities, destroying every symbol of religion they could get their hands on. They didn't succeed in doing that at Notre Dame because even the revolutionary leaders who didn't care for, the old Catholic Church's hierarchy and dominance, and resented, understandably, that the church sided with the nobles, right? In the history of France, they were always in the same, part, controlling the peasants, the masses. But in Paris, they didn't allow too many churches to be damaged. But in a lot of other French cities, including this one here, mobs ran rampant, however you want to say that, and vandalized churches by, decapitating statues, even in some cases burning the churches to the ground. So the mob here only got apparently partway through their vandalism before they were stopped or whatever. So they managed to damage this. That's the last part of the meaning. During the French Revolution, some mob, or maybe more than one, attacked this church and damaged the three disciples, or of course, apostles is the word that is in the syllabus. These three, right, followers of Jesus, cut their heads off and one of Jesus's hands. Okay, it's plenty on the meaning. Do a quick form analysis, and then the next slide will be even quicker. But the last one will be a very important one, and we'll still end a good, easily about 8:20 at the latest. Okay, so form analysis, is this balance? Oh, yes, very carefully. Jesus is directly sitting in the middle on either side, or three, right, each on each left and right side of him, of his disciples or apostles. And then we have the rows of figures above and below. And here we have some more of those mythological figures, half human, half animal. So those, of course, are also balanced left to right. To me, it's balanced top to bottom too. Depends on how you, but if you add these figures here from the Zodiac symbols and that arch, and the second one with the half human, half animal figures, and you drew a line across here, I'd say it's balanced both ways. The largest mass is Jesus. That would make sense. And then it's each of these disciples or apostles. You can use either word. And then after that, I guess you could say it's the half human, half animal figures in the upper right archway. Or sorry, I meant to say the first archway. There's two of them, because they're bigger than the signs of the Zodiac. Here, the modeling is part of the design. It always is with a bas-relief panel like this. And that's, of course, the shadows created by the sun that allow us to see the figures. So modeling is part of the design. And then we have the semi texture is quite good, actually, isn't it? On the robes, right? And it was on their hands, I guess, just on one hand here. But on their faces, it's there. He's got his mustache and a beard. And then, of course, there's some of the same kind of textures on these signs of the Zodiac. So there's a lot of carved line is used. That's the only kind of line to create semi textures all over this piece. It is mostly dynamic. By definition, Romanesque sculpture is not static or stable. The only thing stable is the throne behind his head there. But even his halo, obviously, and the rest of his body is in motion, as are all six of the figures down on Earth. And all of these mythological creatures above and below the middle scene, and of course up here in the sign of the Zodiac, there's hardly any straight lines anywhere. And then let's see, the color is a cool gray. I know it looks warm here for some people, but that's just dirt. It just needs to be cleaned. It's the cool gray stone color. And let's see, am I forgetting? For space, the only technique, I don't see foreshortening here. To me, that's not foreshortening. It really isn't, because they're not trying to make this, if anything, it looks like the opposite of foreshortening. So just say that really that the only definite technique for space is overlapping. Of course, the clothes overlapping human figures, and Jesus's body overlapping the throne he's on, and the various apostles overlapping each other. Okay, now this one won't take more than a few minutes, because I've already described what makes something Romanesque. I'll briefly recap that for this slide. This is on the syllabus, so you do need to take notes. The title of this one is Prophet Jeremiah from the Church of Saint Pierre. Sorry about the long titles. I'm not saying that I won't cut either one of these, but I'm not saying that they're so important that either one or both will be on the final. But take the notes for now and be here for the review. You do want to do that so you don't have to waste time studying slides that aren't going to be on the test. Okay, Prophet is Prophet. Remember, not with an F, that's a financial term. This is about, someone from the Bible, an early figure in the Bible. Prophet. Jeremiah is Jeremiah. Jeremiah. Prophet Jeremiah from the Church of Saint, and again, remember the French abbreviate Saint, St. Saint Pierre, French name, of course, Pierre. Prophet Jeremiah from the Church of Saint Pierre. Locations is country, France, and the date is 1130. So what do we have here? We have a piece of Romanesque sculpture. So by definition, it's going to have elongated limbs. Well, look at the legs. I mean, no one's legs are 2/3 of their body, at least nobody I've ever heard of in real life, of course. So elongated limbs, even the feet are elongated. And then his head. No, that's not always the case. Excuse me. Romanesque sculpture didn't always elongate the heads of the main figures, but it often did. And actually, Jesus's head in that last slide was, well, I'll just make that point. If you look closely, it was, right? Much longer than it should be proportionate to the width. But it's not an essential feature. It's always the limbs that are elongated. But here, the head is definitely elongated. Okay, so elongated limbs, particularly the legs and the feet. And then we have the motion. Well, this is a door jamb. So it's a jamb statue, Jamb, not the other meaning of the word jamb. A jamb statue is a statue that lines the door jamb to a church. So this jamb statue is crammed, if you will, or squeezed, you could say it either way, into a small, narrow space. But look, he's dancing a ballet move. Isn't that called the scissors? Where you jump up because he's well up above the ground, right? You see, there's several feet. The slide, of course, doesn't go all the way to the bottom of the floor of the church or the ground in front of it. So it's almost as if he's jumping up and doing a motion. I have friends who used to be danced actually in the Oakland Ballet. Got to see them a couple times years and years ago. Jump up and do a thing with their legs, right? They cross their legs before they hit the ground. It's called the scissors. I think I have that right. You don't have to write that word. You can just say he's moving as though he's dancing. His legs are crossing and he's in motion. Therefore, that is of course, other main feature of all Romanesque sculpture, that the human figures are in motion, in movement, even though he's crammed into this narrow space. And then we have something that doesn't necessarily have to do with the style, but it's really interesting. These are demons or devil dogs, as one commentator, I think it was a different textbook I used to use before Stockstead. They look like, devil dogs or demons, dogs from hell, however you want to write that. But they're clearly mythical creatures that are sent from hell. Why? Because Jeremiah was being tortured in the Bible. He is a figure in the early, it's called the Old Testament. You don't have to write that phrase, but that is the correct phrase, the first part of the Bible. So you can say the early part of the Bible or Old Testament. His figure, his role was as someone who was tortured by all kinds of demons and plagues and suffering in order by the devil to make him give up his loyalty to God, and he wouldn't. He continued to suffer until the devil gave up, and God, and I don't know, I can't remember if he rewarded him, but just anyway, he pleased God by staying loyal and not abandoning his belief in God, and giving up and joining the devil. Right? It's a part of the Bible. There's several scenes like that in different parts of the Bible. So he was one of those early figures in the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament, who endured all kinds of suffering and sent by the devil from hell to shake his faith in God, and it didn't work. He stayed faithful. So that's the symbolism here, supposedly. Of course, if you're a peasant, don't write this. You were probably suffering, of course, in the Middle Ages. They had no rights, no freedom, no choice, and the king or local noble, whoever ruled over them, could do whatever they wanted to them and their families. So you might relate to this figure when you walk inside a church and look up at it. In that, obviously, what do they say? Well, you should suffer silently. Not exactly, but that's sort of what the intended message would be. In this case, this particular church, we do know, was not damaged during the French Revolution, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just, people liked it enough in that town for whatever reason. So this is intact. All right, let's do a formal analysis. He is the largest mass. Then the two devil dogs are the same, or demon dogs. And then the banner or sash. It's really a sash. It's a prayer sash. Say that fast. Prayer sash. He's holding, which he's saying prayers silently, of course, to keep his faith, his strength up from all, and endure all this torture. So that would be the third largest mass. Him, then the dogs, and then the prayer sash or scroll. You could call it a scroll if you prefer. Okay, the Ode technique, of course, is overlapping. again, the scroll or sash overlaps his body, his clothes overlap his legs, and this. Um, I guess the two devil dogs, no, they don't overlap him, do they? Yeah, so just two legs overlap each other, his legs. So there's no other technique for space. Then we have good cinematic texture, like most Romanesque sculpture, really well done detailing on the clothing, the hair, right? And even on these demon dogs, done with carved line, of course. And here the modeling, again, is part of the design, or you couldn't see the details. It is a natural modeling from the sun. And then let's see. Oh, for space, he's larger than life. There is a technique of space for overlapping, but his figure, his body is taller than a normal adult man would be. I think it's like 7 feet, so it's slightly taller than or larger than life. Okay, and then let's see, what have we got? The color is a cool gray color. And he is both stable and dynamic. Overall, because he's jammed into this space, he and the two devil dogs, they're upright, and so they're, mostly at first glance you'd say almost entirely stable. But look carefully, the folds of his robes, the way his legs cross, the sash, his head is even tilted diagonally, so it's both stable and dynamic. And then I would call it balance. If you drew a line across the middle, it'd be roughly balanced, top to bottom. Yeah, right. Because here it's not his waist because of the way the legs are longer than a normal human. So if you do the line here around the upper part of his legs, it would be the same space above and below. And of course, it's balanced left to right as well. All right, let's now go. I think we have to go back to, yeah, there we go. This is a really important slide. It's one of the three I definitely won't cut. I've already said the other two from the study list. Has a high possibility of being on the final. The title is Cathedral Complex. Cathedral Complex, just like it sounds, at Pisa. And of course, that's P-I-S-A, not P-I-Z-Z-A, of course. It's a town, I'm sure everyone has heard of it. Cathedral Complex at Pisa. The location is this country, Italy. And the date, 1350. I always have a problem with that, with Stockstead. That makes it sound like they didn't finish the church until the mid-1300s, by which time Romanesque was way out of style and everything was Gothic. So I will go ahead and say, yes, let's leave the date because I don't want to confuse people when you're using Stockstead to study or maybe make flashcards or whatever, however you study for the final. So we'll use her date, but it is very misleading. So I would start your notes by saying that only one of these buildings had a small section that was done in the 1300s, and that's this structure here. And the only part that was done in the 1300s, after everything else had been finished 150 years earlier, is these Gothic pointed arches. So you just keep it simple and say that only one small detail on the Baptistery, and I think that's the last new term for tonight. No, I actually took it off, the Baptistery. You don't have to worry about how do you spell it then. It's not on the syllabus, but it's B-A-P-I-S-T-R-Y. That's a room in front of a cathedral where baptisms are performed. So this round building is the Baptistery. So the Baptistery had one added detail done more than a century and a half after the rest of the complex. So she should have used the actual date for the buildings, the completion of which was in the late 1100s. You don't have to know another date. I wouldn't do that to you. But if you want to know, it was about 1188 when all three of these buildings were finished. But everyone has seen this one. This has got to be about the most famous structure outside of Rome proper, perhaps in all of Italy, although some would say the Bridge of Sighs in Venice. That Madonna danced under in her first video, if you ever saw that one. This is one of the most famous structures in the world. Of course, it's the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And again, that's P-I-S-A. We're going to talk about why it's leaning and why it's still leaning even after they repaired it in just a minute. But let's define these three buildings. I've already told you this is, if you didn't write it now, you should. The building in front of the cathedral in which baptisms occur. So it's the Baptistery. That's the cathedral. That should be obvious. This is the last term. I knew I had one more term. Cupola. What I'm pointing to with my cursor. A cupola is and it's a relative term, a small room resting, I'll repeat this, a small room resting on top of a roof or a dome. A dome covers the entire room below it, as does, the U.S. Capitol dome, right, that you see on the news quite often. Or if you've ever been to Sacramento, right, the state capitol, or if you've ever been to San Francisco, the city hall, though most people can't get in there now without an appointment, right? But any building with a dome is not the same thing as a cupola, not at all. Some buildings with a dome have a cupola on top of the dome. So I'll say that definition again. It's one that could come up on the final in the true false section. Again, a cupola is a small room resting on top of a roof or a dome. Anybody knows, if you've been to the Petaluma campus, I haven't been there since before the pandemic, but I used to teach there every semester. Those buildings, all of those buildings have cupolas, especially visible at night when you walk across the campus and all the lights are coming out of those rooms. I still don't know what they're used for. Probably ventilation or maybe storage. I don't know. But they're rooms resting on the roof of almost every building on the main campus at Petaluma. Okay, so it's not something you only see in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, but they start during the late medieval. Well, actually, cupolas go all the way back to ancient times, but they're mostly used from this period, the Romanesque period forward. They're still being used in many buildings today, have cupolas, like I just said about the Petaluma campus. Okay, so that's a cupola, not a dome, even if Stockstead may or may not get that right. That's the technical definition. Otherwise, if it was a dome, it would be this big. It would cover the entire interior. So that's on the nave. It's on the roof of the nave. So this is the cathedral. There's the nave, and here's the crossing or transept. See, if I say crossing, that's actually misleading. The arms of the cross, or I'll go ahead and spell that word for those who might, have to know it for the exam. But if you want to write it correctly, it's Transept. That would be the part of the church that is at a right angle to the nave. So the whole thing from above, who sees it but birds, right? And the blueprints, of course, for the architect. It looks like the shape of a cross. Okay, so there's your arms of the cross or transepts. So altogether, this is the cathedral, this is the baptistry, and this is the bell tower. When we say leaning tower of Pisa, we're really talking about the bell tower for the church next to it. Okay, is anybody, now this, I gotta believe somebody here is gonna have some idea. Why is the tower leaning? Well, there's no right or wrong, absolute right. There is a reason, but what would you guess? Can anybody guess? Well, what could make a tower lean like that? No, I know you, it's late. But I got to believe somebody has at least some kind of a theory. Let's go up to get a closer view. Look at the ground around it. Okay, no one's ever seen a building that's leaning in the Bay Area. There are all kinds of buildings that do, but of course, I guess mostly in the hills of the East Bay where I live. Houses that are tilting on their, lot, sinking. Okay, I already told you basically. Nobody can vocalize that. Wow. Okay, you guys are getting tired. All right. Of course, it's not a structural flaw. It's not the foundation itself. The foundation is intact. It's the ground beneath the tower. The ground shifted. It's called settling. The tower settled almost immediately. Within a few years after it was finished, it started settling. Of course, in this view, it would be toward our right. And it kept settling, or you could say sinking, but sinking in anybody know Millennium Tower in San Francisco? It's serious business. Those are $2 million, I think, starting at $2 million luxury condos. It's the second tallest building, I think, in San Francisco after Salesforce Tower. Was it 800 some feet? And it's sinking, it's settling just like this. And there's cracks in the walls of that building. I wouldn't want to have owned one of those condos, even for the people that can afford it. I mean, I don't know what they're trying to figure a way to shore it up. So it happens even now in modern times. But here, they didn't do their, what's the word, soil sample report? A realtor know what that means if you ever bought a house. In the hills of any community, you have to have an engineering inspection. Otherwise, you're foolish to buy a house without that kind of inspection, because what's underneath the house could determine if it'll collapse in an earthquake, settle slowly, or sink, or stay stable. This was put on unstable ground, is how you could say it. The foundation is fine. It's not the structure that's failing. It's the ground underneath it. So that caused it to tilt immediately after it was open. Within, not immediately, I shouldn't say that, but within a few years. So what happened to it now? Well, this is an old slide. This is part of the meaning still. The government of Italy and the United Nations together, so that's the only way to write it, both the UN and the Italian government went in together, or had a joint project. There we go. They formed a joint project to stabilize this tower, because if they didn't, it might eventually collapse. But they only pulled the tower halfway back towards upright and then stopped. So it is more closer than this image now, because this is before they did that restoration. But it's still leaning. Can anybody guess why they didn't pull it all the way up straight? Surely someone has some theory about that. Okay, it's Pisa, Italy. Anybody think of anything else in that town that a tourist would ever want to go to? Oh, okay. Yes. Obviously, they would have destroyed their economy if they did that. The whole reason people go to Pisa who don't live there and or nearby is for the tourism, and the tourism is entirely based on that. There's nothing else in Pisa that's famous that anyone would travel any distance to see. They would have really hurt their whole economy, their local economy. Their tourism would have gone, because there wouldn't be any more leaning towers. So they didn't pull it all the way upright for that reason. And one last reason on the meeting. Then we'll do a formal analysis, and we'll end early, as I promised. The other is one more reason that's more of a, you might say, structural reason or practical reason. Well, economic reasons are pretty practical, so let's just say structural. Another reason that was structural, because if they kept pulling, you can imagine they put big, thick, heavy metal cables and had these strong hydraulic, I don't know what they were, trucks or whatever they used. I've never seen video of it, to pull very slowly over years. They spent slowly, a millimeter at a time, just a little more. If they had if they had tried to pull it all the way upright, it could have, the engineers told them this, the government of Italy, not to do this. It could have cracked in the middle and collapsed while they were trying to restore it, or started to collapse. So they didn't want to risk damaging. So for both the engineering or practical, you could say structural reason, and then for the financial or economic reason of tourism and the income they needed in this town from the visitors who want to see and climb up into this tower. No one here has been to this town. I've never been to Pisa. I've been to Italy 5 times, but never been to Pisa. Anybody here been to Pisa? No? Yeah, because I don't know anybody that's been up in that tower. Well, years ago, I had students who said they went up there. I think it's back to where it's stabilized enough you can. And they closed it for years while they were doing that, semi-straightening, partial, I guess you'd call it partial straightening. Well, that's plenty on the meaning, but of course the style is Romanesque. So obviously that means you have the, right? I forgot I had one more view of it. Actually, it's a closer view of just the cathedral and the tower. It's a nice shot. There's your cupola. Here's your Romanesque rounded arches, and obviously short stubby columns all the way up to the peak of the roof line. So I will just say one more thing, that this is bigger than it looks, the cathedral, and bigger. This is the view you'll have if it's on the exam. It's actually taller than the Baptistery. This is a distorted view because of the camera angle. It's one of those wide angle lenses. I don't know if they still use those. I assume they do with digital cameras. But this picture makes the Baptistery falsely appear to be taller than the cupola of the cathedral, but it's not. So what is the largest mass? We'll start with that, the cathedral. And then it's a close call, but I would say it's probably the tower because it's so tall. And again, the Baptistery looks taller than the bell tower, but there's no way that's the case. No way. We'll get to the dimensions in a minute. Okay, so in order of masses, the first and largest is the cathedral, then the bell tower, and then the Baptistery. For space, we have 3 buildings, one round with about a 60-foot high open dome room. And then we have a cathedral, which has a cupola that reaches a height of about 90 feet when you get to the top of the cupola. So that's the tallest space of the 2 buildings, but the tower is the tallest. The tower is about 140 feet, a little over that. Nearly 140. So this is it's just odd, distorted effect here. The structures don't look relative to the real size they actually are. So the tallest structure for space-wise is about 140 feet, and that's a bell tower. So that's also real space. There's no technique for space here. And then again, of course, the rhythm is pretty obvious with the windows, the Romanesque arches, the stubby columns, right? And the different stories. These are, each one is a separate story on the bell tower. Create very strong rhythm. Colors are almost all cool, off-white on the cathedral, the bell tower, and most of the baptistry, except for the warm red tiles on the dome. And that is a dome there. You see the difference between a dome and a cupola, right? On the dome of the baptistry is warm red. The textures, the real texture of smooth tile and smooth marble. The walls are marble on these buildings. And then there is real smooth metal on this cupola and real smooth glass. So all the textures are smooth, real textures. Marble, metal, tile, and glass. And then we have, let's see, stable and dynamic. Well, each structure is a little bit of both. The baptistry, each individual, right, decorative piece, like each separate column, but it's mostly dynamic, of course. But there are some of the columns give some of the detail I meant to say are stable, but the baptistry is mostly dynamic. The cathedral is both. The walls obviously are stable, as are the columns and the nave overall, and the cross transept across that. But the windows, of course, the Romanesque arches and the cupola are dynamic. The bell tower would appear to be entirely dynamic, partly because it's diagonal and leaning like that. But when it was new and upright, it was straight up, and so of course that would be stable. But the overall shape obviously is round and totally dynamic. There's modeling from the sunlight, natural modeling. There's no techniques for modeling here. And of course, this view must be midday based on the way the shadows are, right? And then let's see, what are we forgetting? Oh, line. There is both carved and visual line. I'm going to go ahead and say that on this slide, even though you can't see it that well because it's not as sharp as this view, that's carved line underneath each of these Romanesque concentric arches. So there is visual line, right, at the corners and around the doors and windows, right? But of course, there also is carved line on the stonework above each of these arches, all the way across the entire building. The same is true for the bell tower. Let's go up a little closer and you'll see that a little bit better. So there's both carved line on the architectural detail and visual line at the corners. But again, if it's on the exam, this is the view that you'll have. Let's see, I know I'm forgetting something. Oh, balance. Yes, each structure is completely balanced if you divide left to right. However, right, if you just do it down the middle, they're symmetrical, all 3 of them, the cathedral, the baptistry. And if you do the line through the middle of the tower itself at the diagonal that it's leaning, it would be symmetrical side to side, but both the cathedral and the baptistry are unbalanced, of course, toward the bottom because they are wider in the bottom half than up at the top, in this case, the top of the dome. And here, of course, the top of the nave, right, and the cupola are narrower than the bottom of the building, the bottom of the nave. Whereas with the leaning tower, it's balance in both directions, both ways. You draw a line across the very middle of it, it's going to be exactly the same height and above than below that line. And obviously it's symmetrical or balanced left to right. Okay, well, as I said, and as I predicted, we are able to finish early, so I'm going to stick around if there are any questions that you have regarding anything we just covered, or your, grades. The papers are due by midnight. If you haven't turned them in, try to make sure you get them in before midnight. I'm not going to restate it because I did at the beginning, held up the piece of paper I wrote on how to label them, which most of you know because you did that with your first paper. And they need to be PDFs. And if you want more quick, response, both for the grading, or if you ask me to confirm that I got them, then the fast way for that to be is for you to send them to Mark W. at AOL. If you happen to send them to Outlook, I will get them that way too, of course, to the campus website. But you get a quicker response from my AOL account. And they need to be PDFs, of course. Okay, and the name on your email needs to match the name just the way you registered, how you enrolled in the class. Otherwise, they could get mixed up or not clear as to who it is that submitted it and which class they're in. That can cause delays, and you don't want that. Okay, we've covered a fair amount tonight in a relatively short time. Any questions about anything we've covered or extra credit options? Nobody here has come close to even getting half of the maximum of 60 points. I think a couple people have maybe 15 or 20, but 60 points is more than a whole letter grade, which may not mean much if you're already earning an A. And again, you can always email me at any point between now and the final exam week to ask what are your point totals. And then you'll know what, not only are you earning what letter grade at that point up to that moment in time, but how many more points you need to get the grade you want in the class. But having extra credit is a margin or for error, if you want to say a cushion. It's not a bad strategy, but of course you have time. The deadline for all extra credit is by the end of final exams week. However, for late papers, the deadline is the week before the finals. I can't accept late papers. I think I've said it a couple times. During finals, there's too much else to do with grading the test and getting all the grades submitted. And so late papers, I think a couple people might still not have done their first, although I think I've gotten almost all those. But maybe if you don't get the second one by midnight tonight, if you get it in within the next 6 days, it's only 5 points off. After that, it's 10. It doesn't go up after that. Okay, I think I've covered pretty much all the things that I can think of that could be helpful to you. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Am I able to do a separate PDF for the cover page that you sent to us, like I did with the
I know
midterm?
I think I'll say yes. It's best if you could combine them, but if you can't, then send them both in the same email, right? You're talking about as a separate attachment because you can't.
Yes.
Some I know it's kind of more cumbersome and it takes longer to grade that way, but on the other hand, if you at least try to do it as a single document, okay, to merge or whatever you want to add the cover page to the paper, if you can, as one PDF. If you can't, then yes, I'll accept it that way. But make sure that your name is correctly spelled, like you said, the name you registered on both of those attachments. And of course, send them all in one email so they don't get bifurcated into different categories. Yeah, so it's if you can't do it the other way, which is the preferred way to combine them, then you can do it that way. That's okay. Sure. Okay, any other questions? Because now you have just a little over 3.5 hours if you haven't already finished your paper or sent it in yet, to make sure it's done on time with no points off. Okay, this is your opportunity. If anybody has any, there's my Spaniel. Yeah, the mailman came at 7 p.m. tonight. What? I heard that's happening in Santa Rosa too. I guess it's a holiday season. Yeah. So she got to bark more than once after dinner time. Okay, anybody have any other questions about anything relating to grading or, extra credit or tonight's topics? Anybody else? Okay, I'll say one more time. I usually give you guys a few, like 90 seconds to just give it a little more thought, because it's easier for me to answer your questions and more immediate, certainly for you, to get the answers if you do them while we're on a Zoom session. But of course, you all know you can email me at any point during the remainder of the semester. For instance, if you want me to look at your paper, well, it's a little late for that. I can't do it before the deadline, obviously. But I can give you feedback if you are going to submit one late anyway. You can send it in to me if you want me to look at it that way and tell you what you're missing, if anything. But don't wait. If you want to get only 5 points off and you choose that option, don't wait till the evening of the 5th day after the due date, because that might take me more than 24 hours to get back to you. And then it would be 10 points off for being a week late. Just keep that in mind. Okay. Again, this is your opportunity. Anybody have any other questions that you want to ask or feel the need to? Nobody else? Okay. All right, you guys. I hope you all have a good week, right? And I'll see you 1 week from tonight. And have a great Thanksgiving. Okay, everybody. A safe and happy Thanksgiving. Okay, good night.